In this lab, we're going to deal with some basic selection work in Photoshop. So we're going to I'm going to open a file here, and I'm going to open this file called Bagpipe Player. And this is the same file you've got on Titanium in your lab folder. And before we start doing some selection, let's kind of figure out what we've got to work with here. What we're going to do is we're going to take this bagpipe player that's in the foreground and isolate him away from the background so that we can do some different kind of manipulations between the foreground and the background. So to start with, I'm going to unlock the background layer. And then I want to take a look at what our image size is. So Photoshop is telling me this file is 43 megabytes large. That's a fairly large file size. I'm going to look here under image size, and it's showing that it is, if we change this to inches, this image is 66 inches wide by 44 inches high at a resolution of 72 pixels per inch. We don't really need it quite that big for this particular exercise. Now, if you want to maintain good resolution, you may want to reduce this. But for now, for this lab exercise, we're going to take this down to about 20 inches. And notice that changed our file size from 43 megabytes down to a much more manageable 4 megabytes. And for this exercise, we're going to keep the resolution at 72. If you're doing something that's going to be printed, you would change this to 300. And then it's actually a bigger file than it was originally. It's 68 megabytes instead of 43. But we're not going to print this, so we're going to leave our resolution at 72. All right, now I'm going to do Command 0 to have this image fill the screen. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to select his hat, and with all the fur on it, select around the contour of his skin. There's a little bit there on the eyebrows. We'll have to see if we can get that. And then a lot of this has pretty good definition on there. So some of the selection is going to be fairly easy. And then some of these bits where we've got fur and hair and things like that, that'll be a little bit more difficult. So we're going to use a variety of selection tools here. I'm going to start just very roughly with the lasso tool. Okay, and I'm going to actually zoom out a little bit. And I'm just going to click and drag and kind of trace around here, staying inside the parts I want to select. Well, that's a rough selection, but I've gotten a fairly good outline here. I'm going to go back to my starting point, and that's our start. With Photoshop, you've got a variety of selection tools that you can use. I'm going to add to this selection just to get these little bits that I missed by, still with the lasso tool. I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and you can see the little plus sign beside it. That means I can add to it. So I can grab and go get these bits in the corners. If there are some large areas that you missed, you can add those as well right now. Now, this isn't a selection that I can really work with, but like I said, it's a starting point. I'm going to save this selection so that I can load it back up again in a minute. And that's a good idea to learn how to save your selections. So we go under our Select menu, say Select or Save Selection, give it a name, call it something like Rough First Selection. Okay, now if I deselect or Command D, I've let that selection go, and I can show you how this might work with a couple of the other selection tools. We could try the magic wand, and the magic wand selects based on a tolerance that you set and trying to go out and catch pixels that are the same color. And notice though, it's gone out and it's selected some of the other bagpipe players' black straps. I can add to that by clicking in here. And this is not really a very good photo for using the magic wand selection tool because there's just so many different colors in it and too many things going on. So I'll deselect that. Another one that you might try sometime is called the quick selection tool, and you can set different brush sizes with this and everything, but basically it goes out and you kind of click and drag through an area. And notice that's doing a pretty good job selecting the areas where there's kind of a definite contour. I'm going to go down here, and it's actually done a pretty good job there on his face. And there it's starting to go out a little bit farther than we want. And then we'll see if we can get some of this. See, that went too far there. Okay, so that's one option there. May try that again, but it's getting a little bit more than we want. So what I would probably do is a combination of different selection tools here. So let's go back to that original selection. Rough first selection, load that up, and that's reselected it. Now what I'm going to do is use some different tools in different areas and kind of add to this selection, make it a little bit finer. So I'm going to zoom in. We're going to start with this face. And I've got my hand tool selected so I can move things around a little bit. Now if you looked at the video on zooming in and zooming out, you know that you don't have to leave your tool. So I'm going to use the magnetic lasso tool and then to add to the selection, which would be the shift key. But if I want to move around without deactivating this tool, I simply press the space bar, and that brings my hand tool back up. So I want to get up to the top of his face here. And then now with my magnetic lasso tool, I'm going to hold down the shift key so that that tells me I'm adding to the selection. I'm going to start inside my selection, lay down a point, and I'm putting that right there at that edge of the black so that I know where to come back to. And that's doing a pretty good job there. Going to let it get a little bit more of his face. And then space to get the hand, move that up, go back to my selection, and it's a pretty good detail here. You can see the hairs inside his nose. How about that? Okay, I'm going to move this again, move that up, go back to my selection, move it again. Okay, now that's probably far enough for right now. I'm going to zoom out, so Command minus. And then what I need to do, whoops, got an area I didn't want. I need to come back to my starting point. So curl around back up there, and I've got that. Now if I want to get rid of this area, which I got by mistake, I'm going to go to my lasso tool, hold down the minus key, which is the option, and say I don't really want this part. Okay, so I've got that. Also, while I'm here, I probably don't want this because this is the background, this is the uniform of the next bagpipe player. So I'm going to go to my magnetic lasso tool, and to subtract from the selection, I hold down the option key. Come back up around here. And I like to lay down just click every once in a while, which lays down a point. Okay, so that's got that. Now let's zoom out. And I'm going to work my way around using the magnetic lasso tool, the lasso tool, until I refine this selection. It's going to take me a few minutes, so I'm not going to show this all on our particular video here, but I'll refine this a bit. All right, I've kind of gone around and cleaned up the selection, made it a little finer, and in some of these areas, let's get a little bit more in here. And about all I've got left is these areas in the fuzzy bits and the hair that I'm going to have to deal with a little bit. Now I'm going to select a little bit of those just with the lasso, regular lasso tool. So holding down the Shift key, I'm going to get out here and get just a little bit of that. Basically so that Photoshop has a better chance of getting the contours here. I'm going to get a little bit of this out in here. And then we're going to go into the select and mask function. Get a little bit more there. All right, so let's save this selection again. So we're going to do save selection and just call this second selection. And then we're ready to do the next function, which is to really refine this using the select and mask. Okay, this is where it gets kind of fun. So you can see we've got pretty good selection in the crisp areas here. Missing a little bit there. We'll have to go see if we can get that. But we don't have a lot. We don't have all the fine edges here in the fur from his hat. We don't have his eyebrow and things like that. And we need some little bit more here. So we're going to click on this select and mask function. And you've got different overlays here that you know, some photos, you know, maybe you want to see it this way. You know, you've got different options here. I usually use this one and then maybe set the opacity to where I can still see these bits that I want to capture. But just, you know, use whichever view is most comfortable for you. Now, it hasn't made any selections here, but it's doing a good job of showing us what we don't have selected. And to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to turn on the Smart Radius. So check this, and then take this radius up. And how far you take it up is a function of how wide your area is that you need to go out and grab detail. It's also a function of the resolution and things like that. So you just have to play with this. I'm going to just kind of move this slowly. Take it out to about, let's take it out to about 20 pixels. And look at that. Okay, it has done a pretty good job of catching some of that fur. Let's zoom in and have a closer look. Yeah, it's caught a lot of the fur. It's even caught his eyebrows. How cool is that? And it's caught some of this. You can see the areas that are red are not selected, and the areas that are now in color are selected. So it's done a pretty good job, but it's not perfect. Now, I could keep playing around with this, or the other thing that you can do, when I get it pretty close, what I usually like to do is go over here to the brush tools. And this one is the Refine Edge brush. And if I just kind of go in here, and let's zoom in again. And if I just click and drag over this area, how about that? It's done a nice job of making that selection. Try again around the eyebrows. Things look pretty good there. It's not going to hurt anything if you try it in the areas where you don't need to do selection. Ideally, it just won't catch anything. Let's see how it did on the edge detection. Yeah, there was a part over in here where we hadn't gotten it, and it already did a nice job finding that edge. So this selection is looking pretty good. Let's go up in here. We'll probably have a little bit we need to correct. So I'm just clicking and dragging on this, and you can see it's changing from red to its actual color. A little bit there. come down in here. Okay, that's pretty good. Command 0. So we've got our selection finished. What do we want to do with this? We want to make sure we save it, right? So we're going to scroll down, and on output settings, we want to make sure that output to selection is checked there. And so if I click OK, now it has taken my original selection and refined it. Okay, so let's save that one. So we're going to do save selection, and we'll call this final foreground. Okay. Now I want to select the rest of the image. And to do that, I simply go to my select menu and say select inverse, and that's going to get everything that is not part of the original selection. And I'll save that. So and I'll call that background. All right, now that we've got the selection done, we've actually done no editing to the picture at all yet. So, but we do have our selections made. Now, before you really get into editing and changing stuff, it's a good idea to duplicate the layers. So I'm just going to click and drag this down to the new layer, and that will make a copy of the layer that that we're already working on. And then I can hide this or lock it or whatever I want to do, but at least we're just going to work on the copy. All right, so let's load the selection. We're going to load the background selection here. And just show you real quickly, now that we've got these things selected differently, we can start to manipulate them. So the effect that I'm going to put on here is to simply put the background in black and white, thereby creating a little bit more pop in the color of the foreground. To do that, I go under Image, while I have it selected, Image, Adjustments, Black and White, and now it will perform that adjustment to the area that's selected. Click OK, deselect, and there you go. All right, so once you get this done, now we can do a lot of other things with layer styles, and we'll do that in the kind of next week. But this is a good start in terms of how to do a selection. And then so I'm going to have you do this on this picture, but also one of your own. Now, before we get out of here, what we want to do is save this as a Photoshop file. So I'm going to go to File, Save As. And then we're going to call this Bagpipe Player PSD, and that will save my original Bagpipe Player JPEG in the version that we started from. So Bagpipe Player PSD, and there we go.